Hello everyone. Let's review the 3-card blind main event tournament results for May. This month we had 246 participants, 36 of which were brand new players to the main event. Regardless of whether you are a new player or a long-standing veteran, thank you to those of you who participated, and I hope to see you again next month. Among the 246 submissions, there were 179 unique decks. If we weigh the cards in these decks by their performance and run them through the Simpsons Diversity Index, you will see that this month was slightly less diverse than the previous month. This decrease was quite small though, so the 3-card blind diversity grade for this month was a B. One of the biggest changes to this month's meta relative to the prior months was the fact that Inkmoth Nexus got unbanned. At face value, Inkmoth Nexus looks like an alternative to Mutavault, which was already a core part of the meta and a pretty popular card. With Inkmoth Nexus, you trade off a little bit of blocking power for evasion. However, what makes Inkmoth Nexus truly distinct is its ability to leverage power increasing effects at twice their expected potential. This led to Inkmoth Nexus being this month's most popular card, being included in nearly 1 in 5 decks. The most popular deck this month is going to be a familiar one to many of you, and that deck was Assassin's Trophy, Golgari Rot Farm, and Treetop Village. As a matter of fact, this deck has been a consistent enough performer that Assassin's Trophy was one of the cards we voted on as a possible ban back in March. Because of that, it might come as a surprise to many of you that this deck came in at a negative average score, in stark contrast to its performance in previous months. Of course, this is in part because the meta adjusts to take into account very powerful and popular decks, but in this case, I think because Inkmoth Nexus was anticipated to be a significant part of the meta, more players than usual were already coming prepared to use non-basic land hate to beat Inkmoth Nexus decks, which just happened to also beat the Assassin's Trophy deck. And now that you've gotten a high-level look at the meta this month, let's jump into congratulating our winners. In Novice 2, our winner was Hopping Girl, who was playing Inkmoth Nexus, Luminarch Aspirant, and Mox Pearl. And you're going to have to get used to me saying that, because our winner in Novice 1 was Reptare, who was playing Inkmoth Nexus, Luminarch Aspirant, and Mox Pearl. And our winner in Aspirant 3 was Dragon Archives, who was playing Inkmoth Nexus, Luminarch Aspirant, and Mox Pearl. Well, you can already see a bit of a disturbing trend emerge here. This deck was the second most popular deck submitted this month, and from what I've shared with you so far, it should be immediately apparent that it performed very well. As mentioned earlier in the video, Inkmoth Nexus is very effective at absorbing power increasing effects. If you can keep both Luminarch Aspirant and Inkmoth Nexus alive, Inkmoth Nexus will be a steadily growing evasive creature with Infect. And if your opponent has removal for one of your 2 threats, Inkmoth Nexus and Luminarch Aspirant independent of each other are nothing to sneeze at. In Aspirant 2, our winner was Viva Skeg Vegas, who was playing Gleeful Demolition, Great Furnace, and Leyline of the Meek. More often than not, this deck simply pumps out 3 2/2s on the first turn of the game and hopes for the best. In this particular pod, it worked out quite well. But as a word of caution for those of you who might be excited by this deck, it's worth knowing that Leyline of the Meek is a symmetrical effect. Viva Skeg Vegas may have gotten a little lucky here and didn't run into many opponents that were also using token-based strategies. In Aspirant 1, our winner was Temperino, who was playing Dwarvenhold, Emrakul the Aeon's Torn, and Stronghold Gambit. This is a deck we've seen before in the past, but as a quick reminder, Stronghold Gambit is basically 3-card blind's equivalent of Show and Tell at home. If your opponent ever has no creatures in their hand, either because they never had any in their hand to begin with, or because they played their only creatures, you can cheat Emrakul into play at a massive discount. This could force your opponent to keep one of their creatures in their hand to avoid you turboing out Emrakul, and if they only had one creature in their deck to begin with, this allows you to pursue your slower game plan of banking up 15 counters on Dwarvenhold to play Emrakul the old-fashioned way. In Contender 5, our winner was Yum, who was playing Mox Pearl, Riling Dawnbreaker, and Rashadan Port. Riling Dawnbreaker was one of the most exciting cards to come out of Tarkir Dragonstorm. but it was a little overshadowed by some of the other most powerful cards from Dragonstorm Tarkir that ended up getting banned. Casting the Omen side of Riling Dawnbreaker over and over nets you a single 2/2 creature every turn, which makes this deck comparable to the classic Tel-Jalad Stylus Sarcomancy deck we've seen in the past. However, unlike the Sarcomancy deck, Riling Dawnbreaker can cram in the backup plan of Rishadan Port, which gets you free wins against most decks that are running lands that come into play tapped. In Contender 4, our winner was LOL44, who was playing Encroach, Scythe Tiger, and Undiscovered Paradise. While taking the first turn of the game, Encroach represented a free win in almost every match that LOL44 ended up in. And there were quite a few decks that were running multiple non-basic lands, which allowed LOL44 to leverage Encroach even when they were on the draw. In Contender 3, our winner was Cookie the Cat, who was playing Mox Pearl, Felia Exuberant Shepherd, and Rishadan Port. It's been a while since we've talked about Felia. Felia's always been a very powerful card, but hasn't been as visible in the meta lately. Felia can grow in size by exiling your own Mox Pearl over and over, or use its flicker effect to destroy your opponent's tokens or reset their scaling threats. And of course, as we've kind of already hinted out this month, Rishadan Port was very effective to abuse players that were running non-basic land strategies. In Contender 2, we had a tie between Cool Guy 68 and Ploop 102, who were both playing Inkmoth Nexus, Luminarch Aspirant, and Mox Pearl. That's right, you may have thought we were done talking about this deck, but here it is again in higher elos. It turns out this strategy was just really strong across the board. In Contender 1, we had another tie between Avaloon and TAS. They were playing nearly the same deck. Both of them were using Tomb of Arami as their threat. Avaloon was using Bottomless Vault and TAS was using Subterranean Hangar. And Avaloon was using Dread Fugue, and TAS was using Inquisition of Kozilek. Both of these decks are capable of firing off a turn 1 hand attack spell, and can use their storage land to crack open Tomb of Arami to get a big flying demon. Although they had the same average score overall, these decks weren't completely interchangeable in terms of how they performed. For example, against Crystal Vein, Magus of the Moon, Simian Spirit Guide, Inquisition of Kozilek can rip Magus of the Moon out of your opponent's hand, but Dread Fugue can't. And on the other side of the equation, against Living Conundrum, Maze of Ith, Sand Silos, Inquisition of Kozilek is a dead card, but the cleaved version of Dread Fugue comes out fast enough to rip away your opponent's Living Conundrum and secure a tie. And our winner in Exemplar this month was Drowned, who was playing Mox Pearl, Riling Dawnbreaker, and Rishadan Port. We've already talked about this deck a bit, but I did want to offer congratulations to Drowned for being a relatively new player to Exemplar and pulling off this win. That being said, because Drowned is a relatively new player to Exemplar, they haven't quite built up enough elo to claim the champion title. Our new champion this month is Talons and Tails, who is playing Isochron Scepter, Lightning Helix, and Mana Crypt. This is a pretty familiar deck, and for those of you who have been following closely, you may be familiar with Talons and Tails as well, because they are a multiple-time champion. Talons and Tails had banked up enough elo that even a comparatively modest performance still left them with the highest amount of elo overall. So I'd like to congratulate our new champion and all of our other winners one more time before we move on to discussing the cards that will be included in this month's ban vote. It won't come as a shock to any of you, but the first card to be included in this month's ban vote is Inkmoth Nexus. Its status as a recently unbanned card, position of being the most popular card this month, and multiple pod wins paint a pretty damning picture for the card. The one saving grace of the card is it is an interesting card that can be used across a number of different strategies. There is an argument to be made here that Luminarch Aspirant was a significant outlier, but even if we were to set Luminarch Aspirant aside for a minute, Inkmoth Nexus was still the most popular card this month, and more than deserved to be included on this vote. Next on our list was Riling Dawnbreaker, which was the second most popular threat this month behind Inkmoth Nexus. It had a couple of pod wins, including winning our Exemplar pod, and from a game theory perspective, the fact that this deck does essentially the same thing as Sarcomancy Telgelad Stylus, but can also include Rishadan Port as a backup plan, marks it as a naturally very powerful deck. This lets us make a smooth transition into discussing Rishadan Port, which was the third most popular card this month, and it had many powerful combinations other than Riling Dawnbreaker, like Felia Exuberant Shepherd and Mesmeric Fiend. Rishadan Port being part of the meta basically allows any 2-drop to shut down man lands and slow lands like depletions or storage lands. In the context of this month, it's likely that a driver for Rishadan Port's popularity was the fact that Inkmoth Nexus was legal, but it has been a consistent and influential part of the meta for a long time now. Next up we have Tomb of Arami, which put up a strong performance this month with its unique ability to fire off turn 1 hand attack spells while still being able to run a storage land based threat. After claiming some high elo pod wins 2 months in a row, it's time to ask the question whether the ability to fire off turn 1 hand attack with a big threat in tow is too strong for the current meta. And the final card on this list, or cards I should say, offers a different angle to approach looking at turn 1 hand attack spells. We are bundling Dreams of Steel and Oil and Intimidation Tactics together so that their fate on this vote is shared. Now we've talked about Dreadfugue, Inquisition of Kozilek, and Encroach already in this video, so it might be a bit of a surprise to hear me talk about Dreams of Steel and Oil instead. However, Dreams of Steel and Oil absolutely dwarfed these other hand attack spells in terms of its popularity. If we want to put a small dent in turn 1 hand attack based strategies, Dreams of Steel and Oil seems like the most logical place to start. Both Dreams of Steel and Oil and Intimidation Tactics look very similar to Divest, but have the slight advantage of exiling the card instead of discarding it. The choice to bundle Dreams of Steel and Oil and Intimidation Tactics together could allow resilient strategies to represent a more meaningful threat to hand attack based decks. Cards like Angel of Sanctions and Nether Spirit would ordinarily be strong against hand attack, but the exile effect pinned onto Dreams of Steel and Oil is preventing them from occupying this niche effectively. Banning Dreams of Steel and Oil and Intimidation Tactics would leave hand attack decks intact, but introduce a more clear weakness that is shared across all of the different turn 1 hand attack options. And that wraps up the list of cards that will be included on this month's community ban vote. Don't forget to cast your vote by visiting the website linked in the description of this video. Thank you for another amazing month of 3-Card Blind, and thanks for watching everyone, and see you soon.